In the summer of 1782, somewhere in the dangerous country north of British held New York City, an American soldier staggered out of the smoke with blood running down his leg. Musket fire cracked through the trees. Smoke drifted low across the road, turning the battlefield into a gray blur of gunpowder and panic. The soldier's name, at least on the Army rolls, was Robert Shurtliff, a private in the Massachusetts line, serving with light infantry near one of the most important military positions in America. A shot had gone into his thigh. Any normal soldier would have gone straight to the surgeon, but the surgeon was more dangerous than the bullet. If he examined the wound, he would discover the secret, and Robert Shurtliff would disappear forever. The soldier was Deborah Sampson, a young woman from Massachusetts who had erased herself, walked into the Continental Army as a man, and fought in America's Revolution, while the soldiers around her had no idea who was standing beside them. She had survived the march, the camp, and the battlefield. Now she had to survive the wound without letting anyone see the truth. Deborah was born in Massachusetts in 1760, in a world that had already chosen her future for her. Her family struggled badly, and she was sent away as an indentured servant. Years of farm work, domestic work, obedience, silence, survival. She did not grow up protected. She grew up useful. By the time she became an adult, she was strong, used to hardship, and restless. She worked as a teacher and as a weaver, doing whatever she could to survive. Since 1775, the colonies had been at war with the British Empire. Lexington and Concord, Bunker Hill, the Siege of Boston. New York lost, Trenton saved, Saratoga won, France entering the war. By 1782, even after the British defeat at Yorktown, the war was not officially over. British troops still held New York City. Peace had not yet been signed. Deborah Sampson saw a doorway in that unfinished war. The Army needed men and paid wages, but it did not accept women as soldiers. So Deborah did not ask permission. She created someone else, choosing the name Robert Shurtliff, a simple, believable name that could be written into a ledger by an officer who had no reason to look too closely. That was her first battle, not against the British, against suspicion. She had to pass as a young man in front of recruiters, lower her voice, harden her posture, hide her body beneath layers of clothing, and become forgettable in exactly the right way. A soldier who seemed unusual might be watched. A soldier who seemed ordinary might survive. In 1782, Deborah Sampson enlisted in the Continental Army under the name Robert Shurtliff and joined the Fourth Massachusetts Regiment. From that moment forward, every ordinary part of Army life became dangerous. Roll call, sleeping quarters, changing clothes, medical inspection, a torn shirt, a fever, a wound. The Army was a world of bodies. Disease moved through camps. Surgeons inspected wounds in the open with bloody sleeves rolled to the elbows. A secret like Deborah's was not supposed to survive there, but it did. Robert Shurtliff marched with the other recruits toward West Point, New York, one of the most important American positions of the war. West Point sat on the Hudson River, guarding the route that connected New England with the rest of the colonies. If the British could control the Hudson, they could split the rebellion apart. That was why Benedict Arnold had tried to betray it in 1780, and why Washington valued it so deeply. Deborah, still living as Robert, served there with light infantry, the fast troops used for scouting and dangerous work. The more dangerous the duty, the more she could prove herself, but the greater the chance a bullet, a blade, or a fever would expose her. The country north of British held New York was not peaceful. Loyalists who supported the crown, patriots who supported independence, raiders who struck at night. A man could disappear on a road and never come home. No one around Deborah knew the truth. To them, Robert was just another young private, brave enough, strong enough, useful enough. For months, the disguise held. She drilled, marched, carried her weapon, and learned the rhythm of army life well enough to hide inside it. But a secret can survive routine. It is crisis that tests it. During a dangerous action in contested territory in the summer of 1782, Deborah was wounded. A wound to the head could be treated, but the wound in her thigh was different, requiring exposure, hands, the removal of clothing. So Deborah made a decision that should have killed her. She hid the wound. For an 18th century soldier, this was terrifying. A wound was an open door to infection. Surgeons were brutal, but they were often the only thing standing between a soldier and a slow death from fever, swelling, and rot. So she chose pain, secrecy, and to keep being Robert. According to the account that followed her, she tried to treat the wound herself rather than let the surgeon see her body, willing to suffer alone rather than surrender the identity that had carried her into the army. Because disguise can get someone into an army, it cannot carry a musket for them, march miles through bad roads, or earn the trust of men who need the soldier beside them to hold steady. For more than a year, the secret survived what should have destroyed it. But the thing that finally exposed Deborah was not a British bullet. In 1783, while serving in Philadelphia, Deborah was struck by a serious fever during an epidemic. She became too sick to control the situation. On the battlefield, she could choose where to stand. With a wound, she could hide the worst of it. But fever took choice away. Robert Shurtliff could no longer protect the secret. The disguise did not collapse in a dramatic confession. It ended in a sick room, with a body too weak to keep pretending, and a doctor close enough to see what no soldier had seen. A woman had lied to enlist, taken a man's place, fooled officers, and worn the uniform under a false identity. In a rigid military world, that could have meant humiliation, punishment, or prison. But that is not what happened. Robert Shurtliff did not exist, but the service had been real. The marches, the danger, the wounds had been real. The soldier had done the work. She received an honorable discharge in 1783. The army she had deceived still had to acknowledge the soldier she had been. Not with the fame given to generals, but enough to let her leave with honor. She married Benjamin Gannett in 1785 and returned to ordinary life on a Massachusetts farm. But the war had marked her. The wounds were still there, and money was scarce. Like many ordinary veterans of the Revolution, Deborah struggled for support from the country she had served. She was not just another poor veteran. She was a woman who had served as a man. In 1792, Massachusetts granted her a pension. Years later, Paul Revere visited her and supported her appeal for federal assistance. America has always been better at remembering certain kinds of heroes than others. It remembered generals on horseback, founding fathers in oil paintings, battlefields, declarations, and flags. Deborah Sampson was harder to place. Too poor to be a grand political figure, too female to be accepted as a normal soldier, too unusual to be comfortably remembered, and too real to be erased completely. A poor woman from Massachusetts disguised herself as a man, enlisted in the Continental Army as Robert Shurtliff, served in the Fourth Massachusetts Regiment, marched, patrolled, and carried a musket, was wounded, and was discovered only after illness forced her into medical care. and she left the Army with honor. The most powerful part of Deborah Sampson's life is not that she became a myth. It is that she became a soldier. Deborah Sampson died in 1827, decades after the war that had remade her life and created a nation. But her account kept returning, in petitions, in speeches, in family memory, in the question of who deserved to be called a veteran. She had not commanded an army, signed a treaty, or won a famous battle. But courage does not always arrive with permission, and sometimes the people who change the meaning of a war are the ones who had to disappear just to enter it. So if you ever see the name Robert Shurtliff in the records of the Continental Army, remember what it was. Not just an alias, not just a disguise. It was a door. Deborah Sampson walked through it into a world that had been built to keep her out, but she crossed it anyway. For more than a year, inside America's exhausted army, in the dangerous shadow of British-held New York, a woman fought the revolution while almost everyone around her saw only a young soldier named Robert. That was how Deborah Sampson vanished, and that was how she survived. If this account pulled you in, subscribe for more forgotten lives, impossible choices, and hidden battles from the wars that shaped history. And tell us in the comments, was Deborah Sampson's greatest act of courage joining the Army, surviving the battlefield, or fighting afterward to prove that her service mattered?